Hi, fourth graders. It's Mrs. Moser. I wanted to model for you how you could approach the questioning strategy, which is part of your reading assignment for this week. So, this week we're working on thick versus thin questions as we read. Good readers ask questions in their brains as they read and try to answer those questions to make sense of the text. And so I'm going to model this using a book by one of my favorite authors. Her name is Trudy Ludwig, and the title of this book is Too Perfect. This book, if you're not familiar with it, Miss Kirker actually recorded a read aloud of this book last week as part of our March Madness book bracket. So if you don't know the book, I'm going to link the read aloud down below. And if you wanted to listen to that, that would be great. But I'll give you a quick summary of this story. So this story is about two girls. The main character's name is Maisie, and her friend Kayla. And at the beginning of the book, Maisie is pretty jealous of Kayla because she thinks Kayla's pretty perfect. Kayla is smart, she's a good student, she's a good athlete, she's popular, she's pretty. And so Maisie kind of feels badly about herself relative to Kayla. However, as the story goes on, we come to find out that Kayla's life is not as perfect as it seems, and that Maisie actually has a lot of good things going for her too. So, as I was reading this story, I asked myself a lot of questions to make sense of the text. And what I like to do is I like to write down questions on sticky notes to help make sense of what I'm reading. You might have a different strategy that works for you. But I took some questions that I had and wrote them down on sticky notes, and I just typed them up so that you could see what those look like. So here are some of the questions I had as I was reading this story. Some of these questions, when I went back and looked at them, were thin questions. They were still important to help me as a reader make sense of the story, but they didn't involve a lot of thinking or analysis or inferencing skills. These are kind of right there questions that I could go back to the text and get answers pretty quickly for. So, an example of a thin question here would be, how long has Maisie known Kayla? That's a pretty thin question. You know, she could answer that question in a couple of words. She could say, I've known Kayla for a couple of years. Another question that was a thin question is, where does the story take place? Now, we know the setting of stories is important, but again, that's a question that could be answered in just a few words. So the setting of the story is mostly at school. Some of these other questions are thicker questions. I really need to interact as a reader with the text and do some thinking. I might use my background knowledge. I might use clues from the text to draw some conclusions about what the answers to these questions might be. So some of these other questions are what we would consider thick questions. Your assignment with the thick versus thin questions this week is to pretend that you're a talk show host. And so you are going to be someone like Ellen DeGeneres or Oprah Winfrey, and you're going to be interviewing, if it is a fiction book, the main character in your book, or if you're reading a nonfiction book, it would be someone who's an expert in the topic that you're reading about. So, this story that I read is a fiction book. It's realistic fiction. It's not true, but it's kind of story that could happen. And so I'm going to imagine that as a talk show host, I am interviewing Maisie. So let me show you how I would go about organizing my note-taking graphic organizer. So here is my graphic organizer. Get to the very top here. So I put my name, I typed right into the Google Doc. I put the title of the book and the author, and then I put what the genre of the book is. In the directions, there is a link to some sentence starters for thick questions. So if you're having trouble coming up with some thick questions, these sentence starters here could help you. These are the kinds of sentence frames that help organize thick questions, questions you really need to think about. So here is mine, and your goal in organizing this is to have a quick introduction. In my introduction, I introduced who the character was that I was interviewing and gave a quick summary of the story. So I said, welcome to the Mrs. Moser Show. Today I will be interviewing Maisie, who is the main character of the book, Too Perfect. Maisie was jealous of her friend Kayla because it seemed like everything Kayla did was perfect, from her looks to her academics to her athleticism. However, Maisie comes to realize that no one is perfect and that Kayla has to deal with her own challenges. I then chose 4. You can choose 3 or 4. I chose 4 of my thick questions and imagined I was asking them to Maisie and imagined what her response would be based upon conclusions I drew from the text. So, my first question was, Maisie, at the beginning of the story, you felt badly about yourself. Why was that? I imagine that Maisie might answer, from the outside, it looked like my friend Kayla always had everything. She was pretty, a good student, and a great athlete. I was always comparing myself to her. Another thick question I could ask is, Maisie, why do you think Kayla feels the need to try to be perfect at everything? It doesn't say anywhere in the story specifically why Kayla feels the need to be perfect. So I need to use my background knowledge and evidence from the text to help me think about what the answer to that would be. So I imagine that Maisie would say, I think Kayla feels a lot of pressure from her parents to be perfect. I noticed during the soccer game, she kept looking at her dad to see if he was happy or disappointed. I believe that she set unrealistic expectations for herself. Another thick question I might have is, why do you think Kayla lashes out at her friend when she misses the goal in soccer? I think that Kayla is really stressed out. She's trying to control everything and is looking for someone else to blame when things don't go her way. And then again, question 4 is optional, but I had another thick question, so I put it in here. Maisie, what do you think would happen if Kayla had appreciation time with her family like you did with yours? I imagine that Maisie would respond, after we started having appreciation time, I realized that I had a lot of positive traits and that no one is perfect. If Kayla had something similar, I bet she would be happier and put less pressure on herself to be good at everything. Finally, I typed up a conclusion and I said, thanks, Maisie. It seems like you learned a lot about your friend Kayla and yourself in this story. I think the moral is that people need to be realistic with their goals and have a growth mindset. No one is perfect and can learn and grow. We can all learn and grow from mistakes. So you'll see I organized this. I have an introduction that kind of introduces my topic and my character and the story or portion of the story that I read. I have a conclusion that kind of wraps it up and gives me the message or the moral. And then I have 3 to 4 main ideas, or in this case, main questions that I came up with as a reader, and some inferences or conclusions that I imagine the character would answer. All of these thick questions help me as a reader make sense of what I'm reading. It helps ground me in the text that I'm reading, and it helps me use my background knowledge to make sense of it. Good readers ask questions.